Hey, fourth graders, it is Mrs. Homily. Just wanted to tell you a little bit more about maybe making maple syrup. Mr. Homily and Rachel and Logan and I make maple syrup at our house. We only have a few trees, and in fact, we typically only tap about 4 trees in our yard to do that. But I'll show you some of the items that we use to cook that up. So, first, you have to have a tree that is at least 12 inches in diameter. And so the tree has to be a foot across in order to tap it and for it to be okay. And a tree smaller than that could get a little too diseased. And so what we do is when the days are above freezing and the nights are below freezing, we will drill a hole kind of at a angle, kind of like this, where the sap would run out into the tree, and then we put what's called a spile into the tree. So the spile is this black plastic piece. Native Americans used to whittle a piece of wood to make a spile. When we first started making maple syrup, we used copper pipe. And what happens is this part goes into the tree, and then the sap runs down into this tube, and then the sap goes into this bucket. And we have a food safe bucket here. You have to use a certain kind of bucket because you'll be consuming the maple syrup and have to use a special kind of bucket. It is super important that you do good cleaning. We use a lot of bleach water when we are making maple syrup because we want to make sure that all of our buckets and our spiles and tubing and things stay clean, since this is going to be food that we eat. Okay, so what happens is days are above freezing, nights are below freezing. That increases pressure in the trees, which causes the sap to go from the roots of the tree up into the branches of the tree during the day when the days heat up. And then the sap comes out into the spile through the tubing into the buckets. And so then we collect that sap every day, and then we cook it down. We cook our syrup, for us, since we don't make very much. We do that out in the garage and over like this kind of stove type thing that we have. What has to happen is it just looks like water, the sap that comes out, because it is mostly water. And so what you do is you are cooking off the water and cooking off the water for several hours. Until we're almost done cooking it, and then we bring it into the house. And then we finish cooking it, and we know when it's done because we use this handy dandy item called a hydrometer. So use your prefix and your suffix there, hydro being water, meter being measurement, and so we are measuring the water content in the sap. So we're also measuring the heat. So we need to get it to the right temperature, and then we also need to make sure it's at the right water content. And so what Mr. Homily and I will do is we'll take this little test tube, pour some syrup in there that we think looks just about done. We put the hydrometer in here, and then it tells us how much water content is in there. So we really have to watch this very closely when we're making it. Okay, so once the syrup is ready, then it's important that we get our canning jars all set. And so here is a finished jar of maple syrup. What's really important is that we wash these jars really, really well. And in order to can a jar, maybe you have some family members who have done home canning before. What you do is, after we've put the syrup in the very hot sterilized jars, then we put them in a canning kettle, and we submerge it in very hot water in order to make a really good seal on this. So there are some other materials that we use to help us with this process. So this is a tool that I use to get the hot syrup jars out of the kettle. This is also a handy tool that has a magnet on the top, and so I also have to heat the metal rings and the metal lids. And so this magnetic top is helpful in getting those metal items out of that hot water, because everything has to be sterilized. And so then finally the maple syrup ends up looking like this, and this is the actual jar that you'll be having, trying your own sample of maple syrup. Oh, one thing I forgot is while we're cooking it, I forgot this, we also have to do a lot of filtering. Filter. That's what makes our maple syrup so golden, nice and transparent, because we're filtering out a lot of things like sugar sand, which isn't really sand, but it's some of the particles that you just need to get out of your maple syrup. And so we do a lot of filtering before we can our maple syrup too. So that's kind of the materials that I use when we are canning. Making maple syrup, it's a lot of hard work, but it is something that we really enjoy. And I hope that you learn a lot today. Thanks.